What we're going to talk about right now is caring for your family and yourself, because again, it's a major deal. When you uproot your family and you're going to go in, maybe you live in Pleasantville. I lived in Pleasantville. I lived in Cleveland, Tennessee, and I was really happy being on staff at North Cleveland Church of God when the Lord spoke to me and said, "Don't get comfortable, you're going to move." And then 3 months later, I knew where I was going, and it was the city of Detroit. Right inside the city, found out it was the murder capital. So I moved from Pleasantville to the murder capital. Well, that has an impact on your children. And so you need to know that where you're going is going to have an impact on your children. So I'm going to start with Matthew 22. This is what the scripture says. There's a question asked, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus responded, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." And so here's the point. We're to love God first, and then we love our neighbors, and we're to love ourselves. He didn't say, don't love yourself. We're to love ourselves. And but because your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. And if you realize, if you do anything to defile this body, he said, God's going to deal with you. So, but we love God, we love others, and we need to treat ourselves as God's child, as we belong to him. And so what I'm going to tell you is the church planter's family has to be a priority. Colossians 3:21 says, "Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged." And so, when you plant a church, here's what happens. You start with zero, just a word from God. God's not a zero, but you start with that word that he gives to you. He starts to deal with you. You start to pray. You confirm the call that he has upon you. And then most of the time, you're going to wind up moving your family someplace. And I think one of the biggest hindrances for a lot of children growing up in a pastor's home is it used to be pastors would move every 2 years or every 3 years. And so it's almost like being in the military. And so, a lot of times military children, they're moved from one base to the next, one city to the next, and sometimes overseas. And so they wind up with some real issues. So this is what I say to church planters. Don't move your family too often. When I went to Detroit, I went with the intent to stay. And so we stayed 15 years. That was a long time. I grew up in Southern Ohio in farm country, and moving into the city of Detroit was like moving into a foreign country because customs were different, and it was tough. So, but what we have to do is provide stability by allowing your family to grow up in a consistent place and environment. And I'm talking about this. It was a heartfelt conviction. I did not want my family to be raised, moving every 2 years. Does anybody here hate moving? I mean, all the packing and unpacking. Every time you move, you box up things, and so we didn't move that much from churches. We did move from house to house. And so the Lord just kind of upgraded us each time that we did. But we pack things up and they're in storage and we don't even know what's there, and it's a pain. Your children, you need to make sure they're in a place where they can grow themselves and have friends and have a place they call home. That's something you need to consider. And a lot of times pastors, if they're not careful, they get so busy growing the church, they fail to grow their children and their families. Sometimes some pastors' wives would say, he's more married to the church than he is to me. Now, if it becomes that, you're in trouble. You're in trouble with your marriage, and your kids will pay a price because of it too. So, but fathers, basically what this means is, I think sometimes as parents, we almost become legalistic with our children because we don't want them to fall into traps And I know when my first son was a little guy, he subscribed uh, to I think it was comic books. And man, I saw this one comic book, and he was like 7 or 8 years old. And I saw this comic book, and it looked evil to me. And I said, where did this come from? And I said, this is horrible. You can't have this. And I just, I'm righteously indignated. My son didn't know. He's only 7 years old. And I took it and threw it in the garbage can. And he started crying. And my wife looked at me and she said, way to go. What you just did was you took what was his and arbitrarily just discarded it. And so I had to apologize to my son. So if we become too hard on our children, you know what happens? They become embittered and they can become hard to us. So when you're pastoring your family is really important. Members' families are important. But what does it profit a man if he gains the world and loses his soul? And I kind of rephrase that. What does it profit you as a pastor if you win everybody else's family and lose yours? You don't have to do that. So we need to learn to temper what we do. But when you make a move, consider your family. We stayed 15 years in Detroit, and we planted the church, and 2 out of that. And when I was asked to interview at North Cleveland Church of God, I asked my wife, I went for the interview, and I told her it went too well. And there was 2 people I called. It was my wife and my mother. My mother was an intercessor, very strong prayer covering. I said, you need to pray. I said, because that interview went too well. And so I had to sit down with my wife and my son. Only had one son at the time. And I talked to them about the move. And my son was 14 at the time. He grew up in Detroit. He had a best buddy whose name was Brent. My son's name was Brent. They were like Jonathan and David. And so I talked to my wife about the move because I just told the Lord, if you want me in Detroit for the rest of my life, we'll stay. And then I'd get called to interview at the church where I really learned a lot about ministry. It's kind of like my alma mater, so to speak, spiritually. And so surprisingly, my 14-year-old son said, Dad, if you get the vote, I think you ought to do it. And my wife, basically, if you get the vote, you feel like we're supposed to do it, we'll go. But it was important for me to hear from them, not just from a church that wanted me to come. So benefits, church planting benefits for the family. Number one, what you will do is you will meet the most basic psychological needs of others to love and be loved and to feel useful to yourself and to others. Don't get into the thing of just using people to accomplish your goals. You're there for them and their benefit, getting them close to God. Another benefit is you will grow and develop as a leader. I started out as a church planter, and I learned to preach, in a satellite church for North Cleveland Church of God. That's where I started. And so I learned to preach, and sometimes my sermons weren't great. And one lady that got saved the first Sunday, I'd gone through a tough time, and I preached I feel like it was a really bad sermon, but she got saved. And so she had 4 kids, and that lady served the Lord until she died several years later. But I asked her one time, I said, Pearl, that first Sunday you came, and I said, I preached a really bad sermon. And I said, but you gave your heart to the Lord. She said, Pastor, it was pretty bad. I said, well, why did you? She stood up and came to the front of the living room of this house, which was the sanctuary. I said, why did you do that? She said, something made me get up. And I did. And she accepted the Lord. And you know what it was? She said, the Lord made me do it. Well, her whole family got saved, including her husband. So, but I learned to preach with that group, and I learned to develop as a leader and to serve people in significant events of their lives, like marriage and birth and funerals. Listen, in my lifetime, I've done probably over 600 funerals. I've done a lot of weddings. And so I've got more behind me now that I've got before me, with the exception of like in the last 5 years with training folks like you. The Church of God has planted over 900 churches in the US and Canada. And so what my ministry today is pouring into other people to share what God has done in my life. And but you get to see God working in people's lives and see the lost turn their lives over to him. I'll tell you what I did about 3 months ago. We've been gone from Detroit for 28 years. And so I called a lady who got saved at the church plant in Detroit in January of 1977. And she probably got saved along about March and of that year. But her husband got saved, all of her children got saved. And just out of the blue, I called her. Her husband's dead. He went to heaven. He was an alcoholic that got saved. And he went to heaven. But I called her. Her name is Sue. And I said, Sue, it's Pastor Maloney. And she just squealed. And we just talked a little bit. And she said, Pastor, she said, when you came to that church, she said, it changed our whole family forever. She said, all of my children are still serving the Lord. And she said, we talk about you and my wife, Sharon. And she was just so excited that I called. And she's getting close to 80 years old. But still, that church plant, it brought salvation to a lot of people. We started a Christian coffee house. And out of that coffee house, we had over 400 people accept Christ in 2 years. Some of them became members of the church. So that's being entrepreneurial. I didn't do the coffee house, somebody else did it, but he was on staff with us at the church. So, but what you'll do is see God work in people's lives and see the lost turn to Christ. And so, this thing of just make sure that you take care of your family before you take care of the church. And you may not agree with that, but this is what Paul said. He said, if we don't provide for our family, he said, we're worse than an infidel. And so I look at it, it's kind of a triangle. God first, family second. If I don't take care of my family properly, I'm disqualified from ministering in the church. So it's kind of like a triangle, And so I had to make sure that I took care of my family if I'm going to talk to other people about how to live their lives. So we're going to go to benefits for church planters and their families. Number 5 on that is develop your spiritual gifts and help your family develop theirs. Model what being a servant of Jesus Christ means to your children. To your children. I mean, it's awful if your kids grow up and they've been angry with you for years because you took care of other people's kids, but you neglected them. And so, there are things like vacation. You take a vacation, how do you spell it? Some pastors never take a vacation. Some pastors thought camp meeting was vacation. It's not. You need time to refresh with your family and create memories for all of you in your family. And so, benefits of church planters and their families, you go beyond your comfort zone to reach others with the gospel. Now, we're living in a day during the pandemic, I promise you, women are coming out of the woodwork that during the pandemic, God has spoken to them to plant a church. One lady who's right here in Cleveland helped plant a church in the Chattanooga area. And she went on to COG CPN.com to register as one of our church planters. And if you're interested in doing that, you need to do the same. I called her, and when I did, her name is Edie. I said, Edie, what do you want to do? She said, I'm going to plant a church in my house. I said, great. House churches are coming in pretty strong these days. And she said, I have 3 women that are going to help me. I said, great, they can plant one too. She said 2 of them will. And since then, she's going to launch in January or February. And since then, she's got another lady. So she's got 3 that will want to plant churches as she plants her church, and she's raising them up. So, but here's the deal. Whether it's the man or the woman that is the pastor, you got to remember your relationship with your spouse. And so Ephesians 5:25 says, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. And so don't allow the expectations of the church body to hinder you from meeting the needs of your spouse. whether it's man pastor, woman pastor, doesn't matter. You got to take care of your family first. Take time to be with each member of your family. Some families feel the pastor is just married to the church, and it results in family members being neglected. There's dangers for the church planter's family. The lack of limits. If permitted, the ministry will consume all of your time and your energy. So where's family time come in? What about school events for your children? What about, you know, things have really changed today. When I was a kid, you know, you didn't do ballet and that stuff. Today, I mean, kids have got ballet, they've got soccer, they've got every kind of sport you can think of. And you know, I've got a little granddaughter. When she was like 7 years old, she was doing ballet. She was in the Nutcracker. So at Christmas time, when they came to see us, she had me dancing with her doing the Nutcracker thing, you know, and grandchildren can get you to do about anything. You know, I get into the little train that rides through the mall with my grandkids, and I love it. But you know what? If you're not careful, ministry will take up all of your time and energy, and you've got nothing left for family. And if you lose your family, you disqualify yourself. So don't try to meet unrealistic expectations for people. Know what your limits are. And I'm going to tell you one for me. I had one counseling course in college for my bachelor's degree. One. I'm not a counselor, but you know, I read some other books and things, and so I started setting up counseling appointments for people. And finally, one day, I had 5 appointments. I had a chest something going on, respiratory thing going on. So I'm taking some cough medicine, all this. And it was the 5th appointment of the day. And this guy was just droning on and on and on. And I'm just trying to keep my eyes open. That medicine had made me drowsy. And all of a sudden my head just went, and it dropped. I fell asleep while the guy was talking. And when my head dropped, I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." He said, "No problem, Pastor. I'll come back." He didn't come back, but guess what I did? That day, I made the decision. I am not a counselor. I am going to refer people to somebody that's qualified to do what they need instead of me trying to be everything to everybody. And so my wife is a certified counselor. And so she's built in. And so she loves it. And, you know, but it's not me. And so it's been a benefit to other people because I'm just not a counselor. I'm a preacher. I'm a pastor. So, but here's what happens. A danger is that pastoring, church planting can replace the relationship with spouse and family or friends with the work of the ministry, and you can't do that. And isolation in a new environment far from family and friends is something you have to watch out for. And so, I mean, every year, twice a year, we would go see our family, and that was a big deal for us to do that because we didn't have a lot of money. But my wife was from Pennsylvania, we were in Detroit, and I was from Ohio, so we did a triangle trip, and it was a lot of miles. But you know what? It kept us connected. And I will say this too: I always stayed connected with family back in those days via phone. I mean, you know, just a short phone call, just how you doing. But, you know, even with your brothers and sisters and your mom and your dad as church planters, don't lose contact with your family. You'll regret it one day if you do. Another danger is not taking advantage of opportunities for the family to grow together, you know, things that you can do together, cultivating codependency by engaging emotionally with people who have really too many needs. I mean, they can wear you out and will wear you out. And you have to set some ground rules. I mean, you know what? I'm pastoring a church right now while I work here at General Headquarters. I took it 2.5 years ago, about 40 people. They were getting ready to close it because they had a building payment of almost $10,000 a month. They were behind on everything. And so what happened was I asked for permission to do it, to revitalize it, not knowing we'd go into a pandemic. First year, we got it up to a couple hundred. And then when the pandemic hit, we had to shut down like everybody else for a while to get our feet on the ground. And then we came back 120, 130. We're back up, bumping 200 again along the way. But this couple wanted to talk with me and wanted to know if it's okay to call me in the middle of the night. Now, what would you say? I said, if it's an absolute emergency, yeah. But if it's just because you can't sleep or you didn't take your medicine, I said, no. I said, because you know what? I'm full-time in a lot of ways. And I said, but I can't make it myself if I don't take care of myself and if I don't take care of my family. So you got to be careful. I mean, there will be, I had one lady call me once, I promise you, and it's middle of the night and she said she couldn't sleep. So I prayed for her. And guess what? I couldn't go back to sleep the rest of the night. It didn't help me. And I don't know if she went to sleep or not. So, you got to set some boundaries and some guardrails up. The home fails to be a safe haven where family members can be themselves and express their feelings. You know what? I had a young guy that I brought into Detroit to be our youth pastor, and he was going to live there for about a month until he found a place to live. And this is the truth. What happened was, after a month, Detroit scared him half to death. He quit and just stayed at my house. And I was young and dumb. And so this went on for like 2 or 3 months and he was still there. And my younger brother was there. He had his own apartment, was working and all that. And I came home one day and the guy that was just staying at my house, I mean, it was driving us nuts, but I just wouldn't tell him you need to move out. So my brother came in, he said, hey, listen, he said, my brother did not take you in to raise you. I said, you quit and you're staying on. He said, you need to get out. And the guy got in his face, said, what are you going to do if I don't? He said, you don't want to find out. You need to be out by 3 o'clock today. I came home, he was out. And what he did was he moved in with another member and he stayed for a few weeks. But you know what? When you bring people into your home, it disrupts your family. And I'm not saying you shouldn't ever do it. You better be careful about things like that because it can really set you up for failure if you don't. But home fails to be a safe haven where family members can be themselves. And that's a big problem. So you need to set boundaries even for your own home. Caring for yourself, church planners must take care of themselves in order to be able to serve the needs of the ministry. And a lot of times we abuse ourselves. And so this is what I'm going to close out with. As a pastor, whether you're man or woman, you have to be both physically and emotionally present with your family. And that's with the good things and the bad things. So try to keep a balance in your lives. So I will close out with this, that it's God first, spouse and family second, and ministry to the church and others. That's the way it's supposed to work.